Good afternoon and welcome. I'm Jocelyn Dorsey, Director of Editorials and Public Affairs for WSB TV Channel 2, community coverage you can count on. On behalf of Cox Enterprises and Bark Technologies, I'd like to welcome everyone to Atlanta Stands Up to Bullying, and I'd like to ask our panelists to join me here on the stage. Yes, you can clap. I don't know if you knew, but October is National Bullying Prevention Month. And today is designated as Unity Day, a day where we stand for kindness, acceptance, and inclusion. By being here, you are showing unity in the cause to stop bullying and put our children on a path to success. According to the National Center for Educational Statistics, 1 out of every 4 students report being bullied during the school year. That's 25%. The Centers for Disease Control says students who experience bullying are at an increased risk for poor school adjustment, sleep difficulties, anxiety, and depression, and sometimes worse. Our goal today is to have an open dialogue about bullying and other online risks that children face in today's world. We want to identify positive ways to address these issues, and we have a great event lined up with experts who will give each of us a brief talk, and then we'll roll into a panel discussion with the opportunity for you to ask questions as well. Our first speaker is Ben Halpert, founder and president of Savvy Cyber Kids, who will speak on perception versus reality with regard to social media and its impact on our kids, with his talk, For Hire Social Media Manager.
Thank you. All right, well, good morning, almost afternoon to everybody. It's great to see you here. So I saw this statistic, and it's like every other statistic. It's just a number. This one is from a study from 2014, and depending on the study that you look at, maybe it's 14%, maybe it's 68%, maybe it's 42%, but the point is that we have an issue. And we have an issue that all school communities and society as a whole needs to deal with. So bullying and cyberbullying is part of a subset of cyber ethics issues. And all these issues actually interrelate to one another. They don't stand on their own. So if you have one of these issues going on, more than likely you have many of these issues going on within your communities. So the focus of the end of that presentation was to get parents to take some kind of action, as you can tell. But all of these statistics that you saw in there all have an impact in our school communities and the communities where we live. And it's because children today are actually being socialized online before they're born. They're actually being socialized almost from the moment of conception. You know, you see a positive pregnancy test, right? That's usually the first post that you see. And then you get follow-on pictures that you see on social media with due dates, and then you get another one about it's a boy, it's a girl, or we're not telling you. And then some people post, you know, they get the name, all before the child ever shows up. So everything we're doing from a societal perspective, we're teaching our kids that they can't live without technology in their lives. And we're reinforcing that in every way. And so although technology does amazing things for us and it revolutionizes the way we live in the world today, there are people that are out there that are not nice. And they target people, kids and even adults, through bullying online because it's easy. It's really, really easy.
There are people who think Julia Roberts is hot. Her gigantic mouth looks like it will devour an elephant in one bite. Thank you, Chemotherapy 7, and good luck.
At Triple M Candy Yams would like to let me know that Drake looks like Voldemort with hair.
Chris O'Donnell has a potato face. He does. Hashtag potato face.
My mom thinks that Joseph Gordon-Levitt looks like a Q-tip.
Rob Lowe looks like skin cancer.
Zooey Deschanel is overrated. I think I'm underrated.
Did you know that if you skinned Larry King and ironed out his leather, you could make enough coats to give one to every poor child in America?
Wiz Khalifa looks like a homeless woman.
I really want to just flick Iggy Azalea's stupid mole off her face and into the bin.
Weather in New York City right now is like a young Britney Spears. Pretty hot, kind of gross.
Ashton Kutcher needs to get hit by a bus ASAP.
Great acting, Dennis Quaid. You old, irrelevant pig.
Don Rickles looks like Yoda.
Okay, and have you watched Jimmy Kimmel Show?
Oh, yeah.
So these are the clean ones that I showed to middle school and high school students as examples of people online being mean. About 50% of all middle school kids and high school kids that I go talk to watch these online. They don't stay up to watch the show, but they watch them on YouTube because they're all there. But again, these are the clean ones that I can show in a school setting, and they've seen the ones that are way, way worse. So they're entertaining when you actually watch them, but if you actually think about what's happening, it's very sad. But anytime a guest comes on the Jimmy Kimmel Show, no matter who they are, if they're a politician, if they're in sports, and they're an athlete, if they're a musician, if they're an actor, if they're an actress, President Obama was on it, he read his own mean tweets. He makes these people read these mean comments that are posted on social media. And for most of these people, this is the first time they've ever seen these mean tweets that are sent to them. And the reason is, most of these people have social media managers. They don't actually go on and look at their own social media profiles, and they don't actually interact with their followers, with their fans. Some of them do, but most of them actually don't. So these are some tweets that were sent out by Iggy Azalea. She was actually one of those people that you've seen. The internet is the ugliest reflection of mankind there is. My management will tweet and run my accounts from today onwards with updates, etc., unless my message is signed with -IA. Love you all. Peace out. By the way, she didn't sign that -IA, right? So no longer is she there. And so all of these people that are in the limelight, if you watch interviews with them and you read articles where they're interviewed and they talk about the impact of social media on them and how it makes them feel, you know, There's lots of commonalities. It makes them feel bad about themselves. It makes them feel anxious. It makes them feel depressed. It makes them focus on their body. It makes them focus on the way that they feel. And they all say that they really just can't perform in what it is that their life goal is, right? Their life goal is to excel at what they've chosen to do. So they're not on social media. But our kids don't know that. Our kids look at social media and think everything's rosy and think they should be just as happy and popular and get as many likes and retweets and shares on social media like these quote-unquote famous people do. But it's not the famous people. It's people that work for them. So until kids can actually hire their own social media managers when they get a little bit of money, we need to teach them some concepts. The first one is perception versus reality. And so, you know, the little discussion we just had about having social media managers run your accounts, see and filter, and if there's anything that one of them actually needs to take a look at, they'll let them see it, or they'll let them respond. Next one's respect. Respect for yourself and respect for others, right? How does it make somebody feel if you were the bully or if you were being mean to somebody? And how would it make you feel? And empathy. And if you put yourself in someone else's shoes, would you like it if it was directed towards you? And then appropriate response. Teaching kids that there is a way to handle bullying, mean talk, haters, trolls, whatever you want to call them online. There are things that you can do. The easiest one is to ignore it, delete it, block them. If it's super persistent, get help. Contact the social media companies. Tell your parent, tell your close friends, tell a school counselor, get teachers involved, get the community involved, and if all that fails, you can go to the police. But typically, what we see for middle school students and high school students is that it stops. The mean talk and the hate stops if they stop responding and engaging in it. Because the people that are doing this are looking to get a rise out of somebody. And if the community has a similar mission of non-tolerance for bullying and online hate, then it'll stop if it's coming from the school. All right?
Thank you. Our next speaker is Dr. David Luxton from the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences at University of Washington School of Medicine, who will discuss technological approaches to suicide prevention. Dr. Luxton.
Good afternoon. I am an affiliate associate professor at the University of Washington, the School of Medicine. I'm a clinical psychologist by training. I'm a licensed psychologist, but I also work in technology. I'm a technologist. I work with a nonprofit in Seattle called Now Matters Now. You should check them out. They do some really neat stuff with people with lived experience, people who have experienced suicide in their lives or suicide, maybe family members or have suffered themselves, and that they've kind of helping to support the community. And I'm also on the board of advisors with BARC, which BARC is a really awesome company. I really love what they're doing with social media and their tools. So what I hope to do today is talk about some background about the problem of suicide, specifically with young people. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the risk factors among young people. And then I'm going to talk briefly about the role of cyberbullying in suicide. And then I'm going to talk about some of the modern technological approaches that are being developed and put to use today to help prevent suicide among young people and really just the general population. So this is from the CDC, and what this shows is the rates of suicide among the US population. This is from 2014 data. And going across the top are the age bands, and then kind of going down are the ranks. And what's in green there are suicide, deaths by suicide. And as you can see, the second leading cause of death among people between the ages of 10 up through 34 is suicide. And if this isn't an eye-opener, I don't know what is. This is a serious problem. And really, suicide is really in the top 10 of just about every age band in the US population. Now this graph shows, this is worldwide, this is from the World Health Organization, and what it's showing is not suicide rates, but it's showing the number of suicides in the world based on counts, and this is in thousands. So if you look at the On the far left, that's the count in thousands. And you'll see here again, it's really this young group of people really between ages, late teens up until early 30s. The most numbers of suicides are among that group. And what this graph also shows is that it's also much more prevalent in populations that are lower income. And I think this is important. And it also emphasizes this is a worldwide problem. It's not just here in the United States. So here's some other facts about suicide among young people. Suicide rate among 15 to 24-year-olds is 11.5 per 100,000. It's pretty high. This is not nearly as high as the overall population, including adults, which is about 19 to 20 per 100,000. But nonetheless, just one is too many. 50 to 100 suicide attempts occur for every completed suicide in adolescence. So there's a lot more attempts than actual suicides, but a number one risk factor for a completed suicide are previous attempts. About 17% of students in grades 9 through 12 in the United States have seriously considered attempting a suicide in the previous 12 months. This is from data, again, from the CDC. This is much higher among young girls than it is for boys. And among adolescents who attempted suicide, 67% had a lifetime history of some sort of treatment, and what I'm referring to is behavioral health kind of treatment, or some sort of services, whether it's a counseling or some other kind of health service prior to their attempt. And so what I like about this statistic is it shows that there's an intervention point among many people. So if we start training our primary care providers and other kind of healthcare providers about suicide prevention with young people, not just adults, we have a really good intervention point. It also varies by sex and age. And so attempts are much greater in high school girls than it is for boys. I mentioned that already. And it's about 21 to 31% for girls versus about 13 to 20% for young boys. And adolescent boys, however, are more likely to actually complete suicide than young girls. So bullying victims, this is just some data from a review paper where they looked at bullying and just in general. And what they find is that bullying victims and perpetrators of bullying actually have higher risk for suicidal behavior than including deaths by suicide, so both attempts and deaths. Bully victims are between 2 and 9 times more likely to consider suicide than non-victims, and both in the general population of children and adolescents and also in other groups, special population or groups with special needs, behavioral problems, lesbian, gay, and bisexual populations. It's been shown to be a risk factor for suicidal behavior. 10 to 14-year-old girls who are bully victims may be at even higher risk for suicide. This is kind of a bucket list of just kind of general risk factors for young people for suicide. If you kind of look at this, there's some of them that really stick out for me are obviously like emotional distress, which can be increased by bullying and cyberbullying, right? Also, having physical disabilities or learning differences, you kind of stick out in your class, and then your kids start to ostracize this child, and it can increase risk. And then also lack of resources too for these young people. Now I'm going to talk about some of the challenges here in just a moment. So this is a definition of bullying. It's an act of intentionally inflicting injury or discomfort upon another person through physical contact or through words or in other ways, repeatedly over time, and for the purpose of intimidation or control. And bullying, as you know, includes not only just kind of the classic kind of bullying, emotional bullying, but also cyberbullying, and texting can be a form of bullying or cyberbullying. And I really want to emphasize this point, and I really like this graphic of this young boy, is that you can't escape cyberbullying. Traditionally, if you were bullied on the school grounds, you could go home at the end of the school day, right? Go up to your room, you're kind of isolated from it, right? You're sort of protected from it. It's only at the school ground. But now, that bullying is present 24/7 and for a very long time. In many ways, it just stays, right? And I think young people, they feel trapped by it, that they cannot escape it, and it's like the world is over, right? It's out there, everyone knows about this, it's over. So just some general points about what helps for suicide prevention, particularly among young people and in the general population. Youth who feel more connected to their school are less likely to engage in suicidal behaviors. Caring connections with other people who care. This seems kind of obvious, but I'm going to talk about a specific intervention here in just a moment that I'm incredibly passionate about that focuses on this particular point. Early detection of risk, providing immediate support. And then when you identify a person who is at high risk for suicide or they have engaged in suicidal behaviors, is to target suicidal behavior with specific interventions. There's tons of research now showing that cognitive behavioral therapy and dialectical behavioral therapy are highly effective. In fact, they're more effective than medications are at treating suicidality. And also restriction of mean, and that means basically taking away any kind of method of self-harm or death. But we have some significant challenges. So people are at high risk. They're just often not in any kind of care, right? They're not even touching the healthcare system. It goes for young people. We don't even know what's going on in their lives most of the time, right? They may be experiencing things or be experiencing depression or suicidal thoughts, and parents might not be fully aware of that. Patients are if I'm talking now here about patients, but this could be really anyone who touches any kind of the part of the healthcare system, is that they're lost to follow-up, after they're treated. So whether it's from an emergency department or inpatient care or any other kind of care setting. So they receive some sort of treatment, and they go back out in the world, and we kind of lose touch with them. Imminent risk or crisis is extremely difficult to detect. So we don't really have, traditionally assessments or kind of monitoring that's going on all the time. And so crisis can happen fairly quickly. So a child can be doing okay, maybe they're depressed, having some suicidal thoughts, but then you have a triggering event at school, right? That thing gets tweeted about them doing something, and that's a triggering event. Now they're in a crisis state, and parents may not even know about it, right? They won't even know. High-risk people feel socially disconnected. They just don't have supports. And family members, teachers, peers, et cetera, may not know how to address the problem. So I'm going to talk briefly here about some technological approaches that can help with this. So a few years ago, some colleagues and I published a paper about technology-based suicide prevention. And we were focusing really across the board, just sort of the general population, not focusing on young people. All these kind of papers I'm going to show you really quickly here, these are, I think they're all in public domain, so you can just access them. And you can also email me, and I'll be happy to send them to you. But they're good review papers that kind of talk about these technologies. This is from 2011. It's in the Journal of Telemedicine eHealth. It's a little bit dated now. Technology changes so fast. But in this paper, we reviewed a bunch of different types of technological approaches, including mobile apps. This is a huge booming industry, mobile health. And in this paper, we specifically reviewed clinical types of apps for suicide prevention specifically. And here are some of the key features about mobile apps or mobile technologies for suicide prevention. They're a great way to provide information, education, and training that's kind of with you 24/7. They can also provide resource location. I'm talking here about the GPS function. And so, for example, if you are a person in crisis, you could use an app that tells you where crisis resources are in your area, or maybe where there's peer support in your area, or maybe even adults who are willing to help you. I'm going to talk here in a minute about some apps that do that. Emergency buttons, these are basically what I call like hot buttons. So it's like a big red button on the phone. So if you feel that you're in crisis, all you have to do is hit the button, and it calls either a crisis center, or it could be calling a friend or a parent. And safety planning and coping tools, these are clinically supported approaches to addressing suicide risk when crisis is starting to happen. So when you start feeling that you're having suicidal thoughts, you follow these safety plans of what you're going to do. You're going to contact maybe your social support. You're going to do various types of kind of exercises, remind yourself of reasons for living, et cetera. And automated assessment and intervention. This is what gets me really super excited. And I'm not going to have a whole lot of time to show you this, but I will talk about at least one or two types of interventions that do this. And basically what I'm talking about here is using technology to assess suicidality in real time, using either self-assessment kind of data, like if you're doing like a survey on your depressed mood or suicidal thoughts, your phone is tracking that for you, and then it can automatically alert someone, like a clinician or a parent, of what's going on, kind of behind the scenes. I'm going to show you just two apps really quick. These were designed for adults, not young people, but I'm showing you these because they really highlight these features. They're also nationally, they're award-winning. They've won national awards, and I'm actually affiliated with both of these in their development and studies, so I thought I'd show them. This one's called Relief Link. It was developed by Dr. Kaslow and colleagues down here at Emory University in Georgia Tech. And what's really cool about this app is that it includes a lot of those things I just described. It has the self-assessment functions built in. It integrates that with reminders, like reminding a person to take their medication at a particular time. It has a safety planning component built in, and it provides a list of resources that are available, such as the crisis line. And it does have that emergency button I was talking about, so you can hit that and it'll actually call the crisis center. So if you feel that you're in crisis, you have that connection immediately. and you can customize it for the end user. This is another one developed by the Department of Defense, National Center for Health and Technology, where I worked for many years. This is called the Virtual Hope Box. It's based on the traditional Hope Box concept. I'm not sure if you've heard of that, but the idea is that traditionally a Hope Box would be just like a cardboard box, like a shoe box, and a person who is experiencing suicidal thoughts would put in kind of things that remind them of reasons for living. It might be photos of their children, or it could actually be like physical items they actually put in there. Maybe it's a note or a message to themselves, like the reasons why they want to stay alive, and they put it in there. So when they're feeling in crisis, they take out the box and then they look at that material. So what we did is we made it virtual. We put it into a mobile app, which people can carry around with them, but it does so much more because it has all those other features I just described. So you can have the crisis button in there, and you have distraction tools. Like it can teach you how to do like mindfulness meditation. It's a really neat app. And by the way, these are all free on the internet. You can get these for free. If you want to learn more about mobile apps, I do recommend the International Association for Suicide Prevention. They have a list. Mostly those are for adults, but I do recommend that as a resource. I was also looking on the internet for just other kind of online kind of reviews or places where they would describe mobile apps for young people. And I found at parents.com, they actually have here's the link there, but they have a kind of a list of mobile apps really geared for parents and some for children that help them to address cyberbullying. And one of them, as I mentioned before, has that GPS locator to where you identify like other parents kind of in your social network who would be willing, who you trust, who would be willing to help out if your child was like out in the neighborhood and they found themselves being bullied and they wanted like a safe place to go or something. They could actually use the app to locate that person who would be their support person. So I want to talk really briefly about carrying contacts or carrying letters. Has anyone ever heard of this, carrying letters intervention? Okay, well, it's a pretty well-known intervention now in the suicide field. Basically what they are is they're just carrying, I call it carrying contacts, traditionally it's called carrying letters. It's basically the routine sending of brief carrying messages to high-risk for suicide persons after they're treated. And it was originally tested in the late 1960s and early 70s by a psychiatrist named Jerome Otto down in San Francisco. And basically what they did is they met with, on inpatient psychiatry units, they met with patients who had attempted suicide. And then once they discharged from the hospital, they stayed in touch with them for 5 years by sending them postal letters. And they sent the letters to people who did not continue in care. Again, remember before I mentioned that there's a group of people that just don't continue in care, super high risk because we can't reach them. So they designed this intervention to reach them. And here's an example of one of the letters. And as you can see, it's really just a simple expression of care. It's not asking, it's not demanding any like research information or anything from the patient. It's just say, hey, I'm thinking about you. I want you to know that we care about you. Feel free to drop us a line if you wish to. Okay, and so this was done in a clinical trial back, like, as I mentioned, in the late 60s and early 70s. And what it showed is that for the first 2 years of the trial, actually lower suicide rates significantly among those who received the letters versus those who did not. And that persisted for 15 years, that trend. There's been other trials that have looked at postal cards, for example, showed similar kind of effects, very effective. And also using technology. I currently have a clinical trial underway. We're doing email. So we're doing this same kind of intervention with email. It's also been done with texting recently as well. And it's showing to be effective. It's a very simple intervention. It doesn't really cost that much. It reaches people who are high risk that don't continue in care. And if you include in those contacts like crisis or resource information, then the person's got it with them. So if they receive that email or the text, or if it's a letter, a postal letter, they've got that with them. So if they feel that they're in crisis, they can contact that resource. This is from the National Suicide Prevention Lifeline. I like this because they actually have now integrated a carrying e-card component. So you can actually go to the site and you can actually send one. So if you know somebody who's kind of high risk, you can send them a carrying e-card. And I'm just going to briefly, because I'm running out of time, but I'm going to talk a little bit about social media here for a moment. So a few years ago, we did a review paper. It's published in the American Journal of Public Health about the pros and cons of social media as it relates to suicide. And here's a list of the cons. You know, it's a place to learn about methods. There are groups that, again, target people, like they kind of encourage suicide or self-harm among people, you know, bullying. Also, suicide pacts is a problem where people kind of come together and they all agree to die by suicide. And as I mentioned before, the cyberbullying thing, again, when it's on social media, there's really no escape from it once it's there. And then the media contagion, you probably have heard of media contagion. It's the idea that when there's a high-profile suicide, that other people in a population will kind of like, they use the term like copycats, they will also do it. But there is some link there with social media. However, the pros are, young people love social media, right? They're using it, so it's an opportunity to do interventions with it. It's way more interactive. You can actually integrate things like videos, like in YouTube, et cetera, towards suicide prevention, like supportive, like people talking about how they've survived it and how they got help. Automated text analysis and alerts, kind of like what BARC does. Link to help resources and info, support groups, which I think are really the number one pros to it. And just really quickly, as I mentioned about the automatic kind of assessment of risk, here's a couple of examples. These both use kind of artificial intelligence or machine learning to learn patterns in language or semantic language. And what it does is it learns how people are, how they when they communicate, if there are things that indicate suicide risk, or maybe it's cyberbullying, like it's analyzing the text to see, well, maybe this child is being bullied by other people. It can identify those patterns and then create some sort of alert. So this first example is called the Durkheim Project. This was developed for the US military. And basically it looks at social media data, email traffic, et cetera, and also self-report, like asking patients or veterans to answer questions about suicidality or depression. And it calculates whether or not this person is at some level of risk, and then it automatically alerts a clinician to then do an intervention. And then the great work that BARC is doing as well with their kind of automatic search features in their technology. This really is the future. And I have to wrap up. Just want to mention this really quick. Virtual humans. This is a really emerging technology now being used. What's really cool about these is they actually talk. You can actually interface with them and talk. They're available 24/7. Why not integrate all this stuff? This is what I'm arguing for. Let's integrate this technology so not only do you have the automatic kind of assessment intervention, but you also have the 24/7 available kind of support using virtual humans, but combining it also with real human stuff, real contacts like those caring contacts. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And our final speaker is Timothy Hamill, Curriculum Services Director at the Westmoreland Intermediate Unit in Pennsylvania. Tim will focus on the evolution of student communication within the educational framework and the impact it's having on school culture.
Thank you. How many educators are in the room? Just a quick show of hands. Yeah, I knew there were a lot of you. I feel like I might be preaching to the choir a little bit today, but I think many of the things that I'm going to speak to should resonate with what you just heard as well, and the changes that we've observed as educators over the last 10, 15, 20 years have been astounding, and we face challenges as a result, and bullying is certainly one of them. One of the items that I think has done that. How many of you grew up with the phone on the left? Yeah, I did. That was in my kitchen. That was what communicating as a kid was like when I was a kid, and I think just looking around the room, there's some folks who are my age in the room. You lived with that. That's how you know, with all your family nearby, you had the 20-foot telephone cord that maybe stretched into the next room and got you a little bit of privacy, but mom was still on the other extension listening in, right? So there was not a lot of privacy. You didn't have the ability to have a conversation without somebody overhearing it. And certainly it didn't happen long term. You didn't have constant conversations that were maybe not so pleasant. Fast forward to the girl on the right. That's what I watched as a father with my children. My girls are 17 and 19 years old. We've lived through this. And that was the view that I had as a father. And how different that is for us today to have kids who communicate in that format. You don't know who they're talking to. You can't see or hear anything. You don't know what the situation may be. You don't know if they're texting, if they're on social media, it's all an unknown. It's a huge unknown. And it's one of those things that as a parent I struggled with a lot. what do I say to can I see what you're doing? Well, that's usually the one you have to do, but you always feel like maybe you're losing their trust a little bit, or that you think you don't trust them, right? So it's a hard thing to deal with. Such a contrasting view of yesterday and today. And I think that's really at the heart of what we're dealing with. So this is, as educators, one of the things that I think really has changed the landscape. How many of you have a BYOD, bring your own device program in your schools? Okay. Where I'm from in Pennsylvania, near Pittsburgh, I would say that probably 80 to 90% of our schools have some form of BYOD in place and are working hard to make it happen even more frequently. That's a challenge, both from a teacher standpoint and from a technology coordinator's job of managing all of this that's going on. Earlier on in the technology integration in our schools, we had control of the traffic. We had control of what kids could see. We could filter. We could manage that quite easily. Now that we have devices coming into our school from outside, that's a lot harder. Some schools are finding ways to do it. You know, they're kind of getting it done, but things still leak through. A lot of situations are such that kids have that access. Okay, they're sitting in a classroom and they're texting when they should be doing something else. You know that happens. I know it happens as a father. I'd get texts from my kids during school hours, and I knew I'd text back, "What are you doing on the phone?" Right? It happens, and it happens a lot. And they're not just texting their parents, right? It's a communication that's going on from one to another. Heck, a YouTube video can completely derail a day if a viral video goes through and kids start, you know, "Hey, did you see that?" You know, and they send it, and it gets, you know, all that chatter happens as a result. So the media that is in their hands and traveling through their day is insanely intense, and there's so much of it. And we as educators are dealing with that challenge now, having to find new ways to manage it. How many classroom teachers do I have in the room? Classroom, any? Okay, they have the hardest job. They have to continue to teach and work in this environment, do the job of educating kids with this distraction in their rooms. And even though many of them have developed methods and ways of maybe trying to keep those devices under control, I guarantee you there's at least several kids through every class that's got the phone under the table doing one of these, okay? It's just, you can't control it completely. And it's frustrating. It's very frustrating. So what happens next is you get the bullying situation happening. I chose these two pictures to put side by side because I think they really do a good job of explaining, and David actually mentioned this in his talk. It's all around us. It's happening all the time, and we don't control it. The picture on the left maybe is a little more of what happened in a bullying situation, you know, that many of us grew up with. You had the bully, you had the kids who stood around and maybe were just bystanders, and then you had the kid who was getting bullied. And it was very easy to see. It was visible. It was there. If you look at the girl on the right, I could ask you the question, is she the bully? Is she getting bullied? Is she a bystander? What's her role? You don't know, and it's impossible to tell. In fact, in her situation, there could be 30 or 40 people in that bystander role or more. So that situation on the left becomes that much more intense. And then I'll ask you the question, where is she in that picture? She's not at school. She's at home. And she's being impacted perhaps by that bullying situation that started back at school and continued when she got home. Or maybe she's the bully that continued it when she got back home. So that challenge that we face of helping kids through that situation of being bullied is so, so difficult. because we don't have, as educators, we don't have those kids under our control for a majority of their life, their day. They're only with us a small portion of their day. What about the rest of the time? How do we deal with that? So a lot of our job as educators has to be to train educators to work with kids, to give them the skills to live with these types of things, to cope with them, to manage them, to end them on their own. That's the biggest challenge. As a father, I dealt with it. I had a daughter who was in this situation, and she thankfully has survived it quite well, but it reached a point of her being at risk. And as a father, I didn't know it. I just thought she just was in that period where, I don't want to talk to Dad about stuff. I don't want to have that conversation. I come to find out later on that for a long period of time, she was in that situation of being bullied, and it was on her phone. It was happening right in front of me, and I didn't know it. So, to have that, to know what I knew as an educator, to have that happen right in my own home was a really scary thing. And it really made me think, what are we doing? What do we have to do? How do we change moving forward and make this so that it doesn't continue to happen? And I am convinced that really it comes down to us as educators changing our school culture enough to allow education, bullying prevention education, and the coping mechanisms to be integrated into our curriculum. We have to talk about it all the time. It has to be there all the time. And that's, I think, our job moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you all for these great insights. And we're going to move on now to our panel discussion. I will ask a few of the questions, although I may direct a question specifically to one of you. I want you all to feel like you can join the conversation. You're all mic'd, so you can all speak up. And after I ask questions, I want to make sure that you all get a chance to do so as well. So begin to think, if I haven't covered some of the topics that you certainly would like to get out there, feel free. There will be a person with a handheld mic that'll walk around. So, Timothy, since you went through this, how did you keep your daughter safe? How do you keep kids safe?
Well, in my case, I think I struggled to keep my daughter safe. And I think she wasn't safe for quite a period of time. So until I was able to identify it and then find the help, thankfully she had a friend who came to us and said, I think there's a problem, which allowed us to get into things and really make it work. So in her case, it was a support mechanism in school. So somebody was trained right. Somebody did help her. And I think that really is, how do we keep them safe? I think it does come down to us training our educators, training those who have hands-on with students, training them with the tools to help kids learn. This is what I do if I have a friend who's having problems. This is what I do if I know that my friend's getting bullied. This is what I should do if I'm getting bullied. And am I a bully? And many times you do have to feel sorry for the student who is the bully, because they may not even realize how intense their actions have been and what's caused.
Either one of you want to add anything?
Yeah, just to pivot on what Tim was saying, we don't only need to retrain staff, we need to train the kids too. We need to train everybody, everyone in the community about how to identify problems with bullying and also suicide prevention. And we have to talk about it openly. Often with suicide, people don't want to talk about it. There's this fear about it. They think, well, if I talk about it with my child, they're going to start thinking about it. Now we're increasing risk for them if we talk about it. It's not really true. And we need an open dialogue about this. And kids need to feel free that they can talk about it and express it to other kids that they feel safe with, and with teachers and with other staff, healthcare professionals, counselors, and their parents, most definitely.
Yeah, just to add to the community component of that, it takes the school It takes any religious affiliation, religious community where the family belongs. It takes any extracurricular activities that children are involved with where they're around other adults and in other, peer groups. And it takes the parents, and it takes all of that community to be on the same page and to start talking about it. And unfortunately, there's a lot of times when it doesn't, there's no talking until something really bad happens. But no one wants it to get to that, so we need to start talking early.
I noticed you had a graphic that had BYOD, bring your own device, and I noticed a few of the educators raised their hand, but many did not. So can you get into that a little bit about what that's about?
Well, bring your own device came about because as educators, we really want students to have access to technology. We know the power of it. We know what it does for learning, for educators to have that in the classroom. We know the kids are, they thrive with that type of technology available. The problem, though, is that many districts, many schools can't afford to equip every single student in their schools with an electronic device. That's where bring your own device comes in, because so many kids carry and own their own devices that it does benefit to have them bring them into the school, and then the technology is kind of purveying the entire district in a much easier way. And those who don't have those, then the school can handle that smaller number that may not have access to the device.
Okay. I'm not an educator, so that's why I asked. And Ben, children often don't report being bullied for many reasons. What advice can you give a parent that would be most effective in addressing the bullying or educators without making it worse for the child who's being targeted?
So from a bully perspective, if you have a child that you think may be bullied, or you get some indication that something's off, if you knew beforehand, you started talking about technology in the child's life and how they use it in school and how they use it for fun and socially. And if not, that's, unfortunately, that's the time when you need to start having those kinds of conversations. And you need to sit down with your children and actually take a look at their devices as well, and take a look at it with them to see what they're actually doing with it. It's okay to actually own up as a parent and say, I actually don't know too much about this technology that you use all the time, and I'd love for you to show me. And kids are typically really open to showing you, a parent, what they do with their technology. They might not show you everything, especially not right away, but they'll start. So start the conversation, and it should be better.
Anybody else want to add?
I agree on the collaborative approach with children. It's not that you don't want to come off as being authoritarian and taking away their devices, right? I mean, over controlling, because that's bad too, because it actually might backfire on you, actually make it worse. And so you want to definitely take that collaborative approach.
And I think that's where our friends at BARC come in to play with the very creative approach that they've taken to giving the ability to identify without necessarily constantly monitoring from a parent perspective, or anybody else who's overseeing the child. They give them the ability to feel a little safer because of that. The fact that there's a warning when something dangerous is happening, and I don't have to constantly look over the shoulder. I feel better as a parent that I'm letting that trust happen with my child.
And David, in discussing bullying, we often focus on the child being bullied. What about the child who is doing the bullying, and what actions can be taken to help the bully?
Yeah, and as I showed in one of my slides there, that the suicide risk is actually quite high for perpetrators of bullying, because often bulliers have also been bullied too, and so they're at high risk. And as Tim mentioned too, a bullier often doesn't know really the effect of what they're doing. They may not be totally conscious of that. The other thing about the use of technology is that there is and you mentioned the bystanders, so you have all these people around, and you have other people, perpetrators as well, right? So it's not just the one person, you got other people chiming in, so now it's like a whole community of people that are bullying a person, right? And so that's a major, major problem. But I do think we need to think about interventions that are targeting people who are bulliers, and help them, and educate them, and get them into counseling when it's appropriate. And using, I think, technological tools that can help do that. There is the risk of, there's always this sort of balance of privacy, right, and freedom of speech, et cetera. And so how do you balance that? And you don't want to be too controlling over people, and if you're identifying a person who may be a bullier, are you going to call the police on them? What are you going to do? Because that has major implications for a young person, right? Getting them in trouble with the law, legal issues, and so you really have to be smart in thinking through all this.
Any other additions? And Timothy, do you have some examples of effective ways that schools and parents can work together to address these issues?
I think that many of our schools, as you mentioned, they bring you in. That's a great beginning. I think the success stories are happening more often when it's an ongoing approach. So I think that many times we forget to continue the process. We were talking earlier, and we said, this is an issue, and sometimes a school will put a program in place, and they'll do it the one time in the year, and they'll check the box and say, we did that. We did our bullying thing for the year. So it needs to be a much more ongoing, constant process. If we can do that, if we can change our curriculum to let that happen, then I think we're doing the right thing. I also understand the difficulty as educators that you have so many mandates and so many things that have to happen in your school that are the testing and all the things that you have to do. Where's the time? You have to be creative is kind of the way you have to approach it. It can't just be pop it in there once and do it.
And David, do you have some examples on effective ways that schools have been using to teach empathy and kindness and inclusiveness?
Yeah, I think really traditional kind of educational talking about it in the context in the classroom and talking about these issues can be helpful. Many schools, I think, have like campaigns where they're doing things where they're having both teacher and students discussions about it, but also bringing in, again, the community and parents and things to talk about these things. I've been asked this kind of question before about the role of schools in kind of dealing with these types of issues and the roles of parents and sort of that, where's the responsibility, right? And I really like this idea of the responsibility is really kind of the community's responsibility. We all need to be working together as a community to address these issues. So it's not just a parent-child problem, and it's not just a problem at school, and the teachers aren't, monitoring who's the bullier and, doing, it's really everyone needs to be involved in this. But definitely, the first line really, though, is the parents. The child spends most of the time with the parents. The parents care the most about a child. And so that really is the first line. And so I think definitely working with parents in helping to give them the tools to help with these issues and to talk about these things and empathy is, I think it's a learned behavior. We're kind of born with it, but we learn it as well. And so, but it's a tricky one. We live in a complex world with a lot of different things that are, as this presentation showed, that are kind of bombarding our young people, and the lines get blurred between what is necessarily a good behavior and what's like socially appropriate behavior or expected behavior and what's not. And it's more complex now than I think it was when many of us were kids.
Interesting you should mention that, because in the Atlanta, I'll just add, in the Atlanta Public Schools, I know they're taking on what they call social emotional learning, and they're doing 65 schools where they are starting every day in every classroom to begin to teach these things, empathy and inclusiveness and all of that. And it's my understanding that, that's going to be the wave of the future. So just mention that. Now we can open it up to questions that you may have. Don't be shy.
Gentlemen, first, thank you for your time and for sharing your expertise today. You mentioned the format of some of the trainings needs to be not a one punch and done, but more of an online, ongoing, apologies. Is there an agency out there or an organization that has some expertise that has set up some programs, some curriculum that can be used? I'm not in a school. I work for the Boy Scouts of America. We would love to take something like this and integrate it in, using it at meetings and throughout the year. But we've struggled to find a solid training on upstander, turning bystanders into upstanders, or preventing, working with bullies, this kind of thing. Is there an agency out there that's doing that kind of work that we could use today?
Yeah.
Yeah, so there's definitely, there's more than one that's out there that's doing that. Common Sense Media has a great program. The U.S. Department of Justice has some really good training in that area. Through Savvy Cyber Kids, we do some of that training as well, and I've been to some Cub Scout, Boy Scout meetings and done it with Girl Scouts as well. So it's definitely out there, and it's probably best to, kind of ask through the network.
The CDC also has some
Yes,
training
the CDC does as well.
violence in young people as well, and suicide prevention.
And in Pennsylvania, the state has actually begun an initiative with the National School Climate Center to begin doing work statewide. So that was Pennsylvania's statewide effort. It's in its very early stages, so I'm sorry I can't speak to its effectiveness yet, but it is the choice of the state to move forward.
I know there's being work done by the Anti-Defamation League also in the schools with their No Place for Hate program. And I'm sure they'll incorporate that in other organizations as well. In the back over here.
I really just have a comment. I work in an independent school in the lower school, elementary school age, and there are so many different parenting styles, and the parents give their children cell phones because they think they need to be able to be in touch with them all the time, which I don't know how we made it with that wall phone in the kitchen all these years. But when you have speakers come, you're kind of speaking to the choir or singing to the choir. You get the parents who are right on board with you. I would love to see commercials that just kind of shock the parents with the bullying that's going on, because you can put commercials on TV during regular prime time about everything, and I would love to see something more like that, because I think that's how we're going to reach some of these parents that don't even realize the impact of, and don't check their children's phone and monitor what's going on with their use.
When you say that, do you mean some of the things that you saw here, the statistics that were alarming?
Statistics, or just showing a scenario of someone being cyberbullied, the two pictures of the person doing it, the person receiving it, just giving them an idea of what actually happens to some of the phones that they are issuing their children without really monitoring.
Good point. I've taken note of that since I work for a television station.
I'm also at the same school, an independent school in the middle school, and I often wonder, we talk about all the responsibility of the school, of the child, of the parents, but I'm not hearing anything about the responsibility of the world of technology. And I feel like when I think back about the tobacco industry and who brought to light the first complaints about the hazard, and there is a hazard here on the mental health and well-being of children, we're giving them something that perhaps is beyond what they're able to cope with, so we're asking them to develop coping skills sooner in their life than they're actually physiologically designed to do. But yet we're not holding the people who are making the product. I'm not hearing any accountability there. So I think back again, like to the flight attendants who brought to light, we're getting sick, we're getting cancer, we're getting this from secondhand smoke, and it became the wave, a subtle wave that became, a monster storm that the tobacco industry was eventually held accountable for what their product was doing. So I'd like somebody to comment on that. Is there anything going on in the world of justice or initiatives or petitions that, or is the technology industry being accountable on their own in any way, shape, or form? Thank you.
So there's a baseline through COPA, which is legislation, at least in the United States, that any technology company, if they capture any information on someone who's younger, on a minor, or someone who's younger than 13 actually for COPA, they have to get parental consent and they have to make that information available. So that's why you'll see a lot of these social media sites, have an age question when you sign up, right? But anyone can say that they're 18 or 21 or 68 or whatever number they want to say. So it's a little bit of a, call it cop-out for the technology companies to say that they're doing something. But then, those technology companies, some of them do a better job than others. Like there's teams at certain companies like a Facebook where they actually go through and they look at profiles to say, this is a 12-year-old or this is a 13-year-old. They don't belong on the platform, they get kicked off. But then they'll just go and create another profile and make some changes and modify it and hope they don't get kicked off again. So it's kind of an ever-changing cat and mouse game.
And I think you have to recognize what the efforts of Bark in this case, being a technology company, attempting to address precisely what you just mentioned. They've seen the issues that you're bringing up, the fact that this is out there and we can't really control it the way we'd like to. So what do? That's in our control. We develop a system to be able to at least warn us and let us see it and identify it and do something about it. I think it will take a lot longer to reach those individual companies because there's open speech available in many of those cases and you can't control that. So we have to put other mechanisms in place to protect our kids.
I really appreciate the question. Is actually really the core question or topic we were talking about in our American Journal of Public Health article we published a few years ago is about the sort of the legal aspects of it. And unfortunately, it's a slippery slope, right? Because you can provide very basic things like age limits and things like that, disclosure kind of statements or things. But then when you start looking at the content of information on social media, you get into free speech stuff, right? And so how much are we going to control that? And how much are we going to require companies or make them liable financially when something goes wrong in that? And so it's a very complex issue. And there have been a number of cases of people suing technology companies over this or trying to. But we have to really be thinking about free speech as well. But I think the answer is in technology. I think we can use technology and leverage it to do this stuff better, like what Bark does. Facebook has a number of things built in that helps to identify. You can even having the community itself report stuff is just more of a manual example of how you can kind of track things. But then using, again, the machine learning stuff kind of behind the scenes, learning, scanning for patterns and things that identify some kind of inappropriate behavior. We can build this stuff in. But there's a burden, too, on companies to do this. And so to do it right and to do it all the time, perfectly. And so we've got to find that balance and also maintain free speech. I want to live in a society where we have free speech, but I also want to protect our kids and our society. So we've got to find that balance.
Yeah. And there's another barrier also from a community perspective, and that is that even if the United States decided to do something and legislate something, a company in another country or a company will relocate to another country where they don't care. So that means that the social media will still be in our children's lives, so we need to figure out how to deal with it as well, and using something like Bark and creating a groundswell within those social media communities can affect change. And so that's why you now see, like abuse report buttons within social media apps. It's not all of them, but if there's enough of a groundswell, then they start.
And he makes a really good point. I don't think a lot of people realize how many of these software applications are from other countries. And I've experienced it firsthand when we had a couple that we had done a story on, and unfortunately it was a very like a neo-Nazi type website that took that couple and really started bashing them. And so we were trying to figure out what we could do to have them take it down, and we found out it was not even in the country. So we were virtually powerless to do much of anything. The couple was concerned, but there wasn't a lot that they could do, but they advised us that the best thing to do is to ignore it. So how many of you all know what Bark is? Because I know they've mentioned it, and so who's best suited to talk about Bark and what they do? Just in a nutshell, so they'll have a sense of it.
Because I've worked a little bit with the folks at Bark, talking about how we can work together with the education community where I live. Specifically, Bark is really a unique way to use technology to protect our students in this social media realm. And it does so without without creating transcripts, without handing over to a parent, here's everything your child typed and wrote, and it's up to you to find it in there. They're using a very high-tech algorithm to identify. It's not just keywords. It's not just certain phrases. It's a combination and a very deep process that goes through the identification of when a child is bullied or when there's a suicidal threat or something that's happening. The system is finding these things, and I'm doing my best to explain it from my view as an educator, but I see it as being a groundbreaking way to look at what our kids are facing, and to, as a parent, be able to feel safer and feel like I'm helping to protect them in that world.
Okay. Any other questions? Right up here. And I wanted to draw your attention that BARC is one of the co-sponsors of this event, and they were very much behind the scenes and not trying to plug it, but I know there may have been some questions about it.
Yeah, just to add a little bit on the question on technology companies. So I work for Common Sense Media. We're a nonprofit organization that is part of trying to really help teachers and parents have their kids be safer and navigate the world of media and technology. And so we reach out to schools, and a lot of our partners are actually technology companies in the cable industry. They are putting information about movies in their TV boxes so that parents can make the right choices as they look for movies for their children. And they are also starting to embrace a lot of our digital citizenship programs. Cox is actually also a supporter of ours. AT&T, I was just at an AT&T event where they're getting their employee base to go out to their schools and their communities and speak about this very issue. And so we're trying to push forward more programs with the Apples and the Googles of the world as well to raise awareness around safety and the children. So feel free to come to me afterwards if you want more information.
And I'll add to that. We have some schools in our region who have gone through the digital citizenship program with Common Sense, and it's wonderful. It really has been, tremendous feedback from our schools that are involved in that. So congratulations on a great job there.
Any other questions? I have one because I've been through this too with my granddaughter, and I saw the dilemma that the school was going through. The dilemma was not just what do you do with the child who is being bullied, but how do you treat and what do you do with the child who is the bullier? And what happened was they suspended the student, basically, for 3 days. The student came back into the classroom, so now the student is angrier because they've been suspended. There hadn't been any treatment because I don't know whether they knew what to do. So what advice would you give educators about, when they're faced with that situation, what would you advise them to do?
Yeah, definitely the empathy factor has to come in here. You have to feel for both the bully and the victim. You have to be able to look at both and realize both have an issue and a problem that has to be dealt with. And I'll defer to David because I think as far as what do you do with that child who is the bully, you may have a little better insight than
I agree. I think the word is compassion. Right? You have to have compassion for both the perpetrator and the victim of it, because as I stated in my talk too, that the perpetrator is coming from a background that maybe it's quite rough for them and their experiences. They may have some other kind of underlying conditions, behavioral health conditions that are contributing to it. And you don't know what their home life is like, right? And so they may not have any supports themselves at all available to them, right? And so they're coming from a really rough background. And so I think we do need to think more about this. I think we need to target interventions to the perpetrators of bullying. And again, both bulliers are also victims of bullying quite often. And so it works both ways. But we need to be thinking more about how can we intervene with them, and we're not just kick them out of school, because like you're saying, it doesn't necessarily help. It doesn't help the
No, it made the situation worse.
It makes it worse.
Yes.
Right, and so we need to think of them and I'll use it, I don't like using the term victim too much, but it's kind of like they're victims too, right? And so we need to be thinking about how to do interventions with them that are effective. And getting them into some sort of behavioral counseling would be helpful. Hopefully it's like within the school or outside of the school where they can get that counseling. And if you can engage with parents, is to do that and to provide them with some information, counseling, and tools that they can use to help with their child. But often these kids can come from very, broken families, right? And so it's very, very tough. Their home life can be very, very tough.
And it's important to make sure that you have a process in place that's also supported by policies. If you're an independent school that you set up, if you're part of a district that the district supports, but then you can set up additional school policies as well so that you know what to do when it happens. You don't wait for it to happen because then you're just reacting and responding. You're making tactical mistakes. And you want to make sure that you're setting yourself up for success. So making sure that the policies are aligned, teachers understand policies, parents understand policies, the students understand policies. So when something does happen, it's just, you're not picking on my child. It's, sorry, this is the policy, they've been educated towards it, and this is what happens now.
I've been thinking about this for years, and one of the things that we can do to help build this sort of compassion and empathy and like what types of training and counseling can we do for young people. And one of them, I think, is just to train people and help them realize that their role in society is to actually help people, And so helping people, that's the good thing. That should be rewarded. So that if a classmate is being bullied, the right thing to do is to intervene, is to help that person, right? And to stick up for them. And that's what we should be doing as a society, is sticking up for each other, right? But it's tough, and we all grew up, and we know what it's like in social environments where sometimes you're choosing a side. What side do you want to be on? And it's very tough. You don't want to be bullied yourself or be identified with a person who everyone else thinks is weak, and so then you're bullied too, and so it's very tough. But I think that's the mindset that we need to create in schools, and I think our greater society. The right thing to do is to help other people.
I was just going to say, to add to that, this carries over into later on in life as in the workplace. If we don't resolve those issues during the school years, we are sending kids into the workforce who will be bullies and will be bullied, and it just continues. I think we've probably all seen it in that vein as well. So the better job we do at that earlier stage in preparing them with the right kind of soft skills to communicate, the right kind of skills to work in a team, that's often where these kind of things bubble up and when they're working together and they have that connection. So teaching them to work well together in these environments in our schools that's going to transfer over into later in life.
Well, in fact, companies now are spending millions on emotional intelligence and programs that they're having to deal with employees on that very thing.
Sure.
That's okay. I'd like to just add one more comment, is that I think it's important for, at all human level, every age level, whether it's a senior, whether it's a child, an infant, in between, all behaviors serve a function. So we never know what that child or adult or person down 400 is carrying in their, their morning, their suitcase. Come on, 400. Okay, crazy highway. But anyway, everybody is, we as adults have coping skills. Kids, not so much. They have what they have. And recognizing that behavior is a red flag. That's a flag that says, caution, something's not right in my life. To explore with that compassion and empathy. Because, they're wounded in some way. And if that wound is not healed and attended to then, it will take them we'll just journey with them into their adult life. So I think it's important as adults for us to recognize how important it is to pay attention to those little flags.
Well, this has been a great discussion. I've certainly learned a lot, and we'll be taking some of that information and hopefully disseminating it out and to the greater public and collecting some business cards. But thank you, gentlemen, for enlightening us and sharing the information and giving us resources that we can move forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.